Have you ever seen a church, a ministry, maybe one you really looked up to, just fall apart? And in the process, you felt your own faith start to shake. It's an incredibly painful and, frankly, confusing thing to go through, and it's happening a lot. So let's just dive right in, because this explainer is all about a new way to understand why this happens, and more importantly, how our faith can actually survive when our institutions don't. I mean, this is the core question, isn't it? It's one thing to be disappointed in a person, but for so many people, it becomes a full-blown crisis of belief in God. So why is the fallout so devastating? Why does the failure of a human or institution so often take our personal faith down with it? And this quote just hits the nail on the head. The source material is really clear on this. Most people aren't just suddenly deciding to reject Jesus. Not at all. It's about the massive, painful gap between the perfect Christ they hear about on Sunday and the broken, sometimes deeply corrupt church they see from Monday to Saturday. That contradiction, that's what sparks the crisis. Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty of the collapse itself. The argument here is that we're not just talking about a few bad apples or a single scandal. Nope, the real problem is way, way deeper. It's actually structural. Think about it like this for a second. If you're taught that the church is the primary proof of God's goodness in the world, and then that very same church is exposed as being corrupt, well, what does that say about God? For a lot of us, it makes God seem absent, or maybe powerless, or even worse, like he was in on it. The entire story you built your faith on just crumbles. It feels like a lie. So what is this fatal flaw? What's the weak spot? The source suggests it isn't just that we have flawed leaders. We've always had those. It's that many modern churches have accidentally adopted a flawed worldview, one that makes them super fragile from the very beginning. And you can see the contrast right here. On one side, you have what we're calling the modern playbook, which, it looks a lot like a corporation. Power is stacked at the top with a charismatic leader. Success is all about numbers and growth, and protecting the brand image is job number one. But on the other side, you have the biblical assembly. This is all about shared responsibility, focusing on actually helping people grow in their faith and, crucially, holding each other accountable. One is designed to look impressive. The other is designed to last. And this is the direct result of that modern playbook. When the celebrity pastor or the church's brand or the cool new movement becomes the stand-in for Jesus, our faith gets anchored to them. We might say we're following Christ, but in reality, our day-to-day faith is tied to a person or an organization. So when they inevitably fail, it feels like Jesus himself failed us. All right, so if the problem is a messed up worldview, what's the fix? Well, the source material proposes a different lens to look through. It's called the divine counsel worldview, and it's a powerful way to re-anchor how we think about God, the church, and our own faith. Now, that might sound a little academic, I get it, but the idea is actually pretty straightforward. Instead of picturing God like a lonely CEO in a corner office just sending down memos, this framework sees him as a king who governs with his counsel. And here's the absolute game changer. He invites us, humanity, the church, to be his partners, his representatives on earth, participating in his rule. This one little shift, it changes everything. So let's boil that down into 3 really practical points. First, it means any authority a human leader has is delegated. They don't own it, they're borrowing it, and they are accountable to God for how they use it. Second, spiritual conflict is real and it's expected. Bad things happening isn't a sign that God is gone. It's part of the story. And third, the church isn't supposed to be a passive audience watching a show. It's an active assembly of people who are all participating in God's work. Okay, so that's the big idea. But how does this actually work in the real world? How does this framework help stop these collapses from happening and help us heal when they do? Think of this worldview as preventative medicine. Before a crisis ever hits, it helps build healthier, more resilient churches. How? Well, first, it distributes authority, so you don't have all the power concentrated in one person's hands. Second, it creates a culture where being honest about your failures is normal, not something you hide to protect the brand. And third, it prepares people for the reality that life is hard and faith gets tested, building endurance instead of promising a perfect, easy life. But what if the collapse has already happened? What if the damage is done? This is where the framework gives us a roadmap for healing. The first step is to recenter on Christ, to separate his unchanging goodness from the very flawed institution that failed. Second, you reframe the collapse. It's not just a defeat. It's a painful exposure of things that were already wrong, and that creates an opportunity for truth. And finally, you rebuild.
recognizing that the true church was never the brand or the building. It's the group of people who are still loyal to Christ.
And all of this brings us to the ultimate point, the conclusion of this whole thing. It's about making sure we know what our anchor is tied to when the storm hits. And it really comes down to this simple, powerful truth. Leaders will fall, institutions will fail. That's a guarantee. But our faith can survive because it was never meant to be placed in them. It's meant to be placed in the unfailing, reigning king, whose authority is never, ever threatened by human failure.
So I'll just leave you with this question to think about. What is your faith really anchored to? Is it a pastor? A denomination? A good experience you had? Or is it anchored to the king himself? Because according to this framework, that's the only anchor that will hold no matter what.